Welcome to Thinking on Film's 2014 Retrospective, where I've gone back through all the films I've seen released in a year and tell you what was worth watching. Now, my apologies, as this list contains very few of the award season films. No doubt I would have loved to see these, but the cinemas here don't show them on release. Award season films are only shown in Britain around February, when my favourite small cinema can afford to show them. So, to end my introduction, screw you, Odeon. I'm going to kick off the list with some special mentions. I, Frankenstein. I, Frankenstein was a pretty bog-standard, just below average film. Though, I want to praise it for having better fire effects than The Hunger Games, which only had an extra $65 million budget. I gave this film 3 stars out of 5. My second special mention is The Amazing Spider-Man 2. This film was so bad that at one point I actually started to watch it as a parody film, and it almost exceeded as one. Two of its very few merits is that 1, at least it killed off a main character, and 2, that if you're ever getting bored, you can always laugh at Andrew Garfield trying to emote. Now, onto the list. This year's runner-up is The Raid 2. The Raid 2 is the sequel to the much appraised Kung Fu film that I've yet to see. But regardless of its predecessor, it manages to deliver a narrative with some truly impressive choreography. Specifically, the fight scenes towards the end of the film are very gratifying to an audience that has been keeping track. I rate it 3.5 stars out of 5. Lucy is Luc Besson's return to the filmmaking game. After the reported failure of The Family, he was receiving a lot of disappointed looks. Many thought he'd lost a directing talent that was so clearly apparent in Leon and The Fifth Element. The reviews leading up to the release of Lucy were a little scathing, with people disregarding it before release because of its silly premise, one that it shares with the successful film Limitless. I only got around to seeing it after much of the hate hype had died, and this allowed me to go into it with a clear head, and I liked it a lot. Luc Besson's auteur flair is there, just a little less apparent than in his previous works. It's definitely a film to watch if you want some fun and don't mind suspending disbelief. I really hope that this is an indication of Luc Besson's return to directing. 3.5 stars out of 5. Lego Movie is one of 2 hit kids films from 2014. Lego was a huge part of my childhood. It was a universe of imagination and stories that you could build, deconstruct and build again. So clearly, the film had a lot to live up to, and at its core, it did. We've started within a perfectly crafted city. As a film, this feels right, but as a Lego film, something seems off. It's too perfect. This is the plot, and this was a good move. The only flaw I found with the film was that it relied a little too heavily on pop culture instead of humour, but more importantly, that they botched the ending. It felt clunky and took away from the characters you'd cared about up until that point. This doesn't take much away from the film though, and it's definitely worth a watch or two. 4 stars out of 5. Godzilla is exactly what you want it to be. It's an action epic. It contains gigantic monsters that fight. What more could you ask for? More screen time would be nice. Godzilla historically always had a human focus, how humans react to being terrorized by huge monsters. Yet, when transferred to Hollywood, this human aspect is made generic and annoying. Practically every disaster film that has a human relationship has the wife or girlfriend be a nurse. It's cliched so that they can be in danger. For example, 2012. This is the flaw with this iteration of Godzilla, but don't get me wrong, it's really quite a great film removed from these aspects. It even has a musical direction that makes me tremble with anticipation in a similar fashion to 2001: A Space Odyssey. This is a lot of fun, and that's all that it has to be. 4 stars out of 5. Edge of Tomorrow is a flawless example of what the average summer blockbuster should be. Primarily, it is content that was developed from an original source. This is not a sequel or a remake. Secondarily, it knows how to keep its pace by having a balance between action and plot, never allowing you enough of either to get bored by it. Finally, it knows how to disguise plot flaws, not by becoming more and more convoluted, causing the viewer to become exasperated. Instead, it lightly glosses over description, allowing you to focus on the task rather than the explanation. I liked the parallel to game ideology, and I think it's a step in the right direction from Tom Cruise and Hollywood in general. 4 stars out of 5. Over the Garden Wall was the biggest surprise for me this year. I'd heard nothing about it until its release. It's technically a series, but I watched all 10 episodes back to back, and it worked really well as a feature-length story. It had inspirations ranging from Brothers Grimm to Studio Ghibli. Along with its subtle sense of humour, it's a great short series with a character arc that is very rewarding. Its art style is quite refined and beautiful, which contrasts with many animation conventions currently. I rate it 4 stars out of 5. Christopher Nolan is a director who tends to disappoint me more often than not, so I went into Interstellar not expecting anything special. I was pleasantly surprised by the film though. It had a few flaws, the main of which being the multiple endings, and Nolan's reluctance to allow some of the beautiful shots to linger a little longer. This once again supports my belief that he struggles to be a visual storyteller. This film hits more emotional notes than most of his other works, and is definitely a step in the right direction. You can see inspirations and homages to other sci-fi epics, mainly Contact and 2001: A Space Odyssey. And while Interstellar needs a little more work to be up there with them, it's a good film that has a good shoe-in to the awards season that's steadily approaching. I gave it 4.5 stars out of 5. Marvel finally takes a step in the right direction. Hiring James Gunn to spearhead Guardians of the Galaxy was a bold move, as he normally goes batshit crazy. Sadly, he seems to have been a bit restrained with Guardians of the Galaxy, but he brought the goofiness back to comic book films. Hopefully this will inspire some of the higher-ups to stop taking the genre so seriously and make some good films. I have a more in-depth video about Guardians of the Galaxy here. I gave it 4.5 stars out of 5. This was a genuine shock from DreamWorks, and it's one of the better family films in recent years. I'd even go as far to say that it's better than the first film. It's unafraid to be realist, with dragons being hunted and characters actually having to suffer emotional harm. This is now a rarity in children's films, which is saddening. The animation is absolutely astounding, greatly showcasing DreamWorks' new engine. The art style is idyllic, and the character design has actually aged the characters since the last film, which matches the emotional growth shown. I'd happily watch this again with family, or on my own. I gave it 4.5 stars out of 5. Wes Anderson's first endeavour into solo screenwriting is of a great adventure in a non-existing country in Europe, which is a nice reference to Charlie Chaplin's The Great Dictator. It has a breakneck pace, and Anderson's meticulous style. Though in this film Anderson as a director is determined to make sure every detail is thought out and placed perfectly within the frame, the characters themselves seem to be detached from the audience. Perhaps this is due to a thematic shift from Anderson's focus on families to friends in this film. It's an absolutely fantastic watch if you want a short film, as its runtime of just about 100 minutes flies by. I rate it 4.5 stars out of 5. Richard Linklater is an amazing director. He is doing something that no other director I know of is. Boyhood was a project that spanned 11 years, and within it, Linklater managed to detail with surprising accuracy my childhood, and I'm sure the childhoods of many other people my age. From the development and discardment of pop culture to life events, Linklater manages to make the normal wonderfully interesting. This is a story about a pretty normal kid, and yet I didn't feel bored for a second. This is something even huge budget action films sometimes can't do, so a huge tip of the hat to Linklater here. This film deserves the Academy Award for Best Screenwriting, and it might win it. Sadly, it probably won't be considered for Best Direction or Innovation, but as long as it gets recognised during award season, I won't start a riot. If there's one film you check out from this list, let this be it. I gave it 5 stars out of 5. Screw you, Odeon.